Right, so the BBC's reputation for impartial broadcasting of news content is, well, it's very much in the gutter these days, isn't it? But what they've done here is so shockingly appalling, nails on their pro-Israel bias so firmly, and it actually has nothing to do with their news content for once either, but what they've actually been up to behind the scenes, and actually not even for the first time either. You see, the BBC has decided to block an aid appeal for Gazan victims of Israeli atrocity. A televised appeal designed to go out on multiple broadcast stations, all of whom have agreed to broadcast it, with the exception of the BBC. They're the only station, it seems, that's got a problem with this. Is that because they're afraid of the Starmer-led government, pro-Israel as that is, coming down on them? Or are they afraid they'll come in for criticism from the Israeli state itself? Whatever the reasoning, this move by the BBC is holding up the entire aid appeal. Our free and impartial, publicly funded broadcaster once again proving it is anything but, and over something like this, it's just frankly unforgivable.
The BBC won't broadcast the appeal. I'm going to do it myself. Anyone who wants to contribute, I'm going to do that. And I'm sorry, you're not going to stop me.
You're not going to stop me. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. The Disaster Emergency Committee Gaza Crisis is available at P.O. Box 999, London, EC3A 3AA. And I know from the BBC, because I've been here most of the morning, nobody here agrees with what the BBC have done. 1,330 people have been killed, 460 children, 5,480 casualties, and the reason the BBC have done it is very simple. The Israeli government objected.
Well, the BBC would disagree with you, and you did hear the line from management there that it's a question of raising impartiality. The public will be concerned, and the other issue, of course, will the aid actually get to the people who need it?
Well, if you're telling me that if I send money to Gaza, the BBC's impartiality will affect. I'm sorry, I'm a human being.
If you send money to Gaza, though, through an appeal, can you be sure that it will get to the people who
Well,
who
in a
want
war
it and who
situation,
need it?
the Israelis have killed 1,330 people. Now, Livni, the Israeli foreign minister, said there is no humanitarian crisis. Now, be clear, the Israelis objected to the BBC. That's the reason. I've never met anyone, and I've done masses of meetings, I've never met anyone who doesn't think we should give aid to Gaza.
What about the other broadcasters who are also not showing it, though?
Well, they're wrong as well. But you see, we are human beings. I know you work for the BBC and I'm a pensioner. We're people. If you saw children dying as they are today in Gaza because there's no food, wouldn't you want to send it?
We have shown what's been happening in Gaza.
I know you've shown it, but I'm talking about trying to helping people.
Yes, but surely people will see it and send the money anyway. What difference does it
They don't know
make?
the address, and that's it. P.O. Box 999, London EC3A 3AA. I'm doing what the BBC won't do.
And you did it earlier as well, and I think people now know what the address is. Can we look at the bigger picture, though, as well?
Yes, of course.
What about targeting the aid going to the people who need it? What about the possibility that it might go to Hamas, that it might actually go to rearm?
Well, all right. Hamas is the elected government. In 2006, Hamas won the general election in Palestine. Jimmy Carter, the former American president, said that.
Right, so that was a bit of footage from back in 2009 featuring the late, great and very much missed Tony Benn doing what he did best, having vested interests spinning like tops as he effortlessly sidestepped all attempts to both silence him and deflect from what he was determined to say, and still ending up, of course, managing to say it. The quality of politician there we sadly no longer have, very much the case in the current Labour government, sadly. Frankly, Tony Benn would have been booted out of this version of it, of that I have no doubt. That interview, though, followed a 2009 strike on Gaza by Israel. The stats Benn read out spoke for themselves there, horrifying as that was at the time. But what we've observed over the last 11 months has been orders of magnitude more severe. Benn twice successfully managed to get donation details out there that, again, the BBC back at that point were blocking from broadcast. Again, an appeal in aid of victims of atrocity in Gaza. An appeal set up by the Disasters Emergency Committee, the DEC. So this is par for the course with the BBC, trotting out that "but Hamas" line. Benn reminding the interviewer there that Hamas were actually the elected government in Gaza. I dare say by now, were he still alive, he would have commented about the fact Hamas had not held an election since that day, since in 2006, and that's true. They hadn't. Hardly democratic, and still true to this day, but largely at this point a moot point. There's not much to govern over in Gaza anymore, is there? And so once again, here in 2024, the DEC have launched an appeal, or At least have tried to. It's not like the DEC, in case you haven't heard of them or are unfamiliar with them, don't have an ample track record either, are hardly new kids on the block to be dismissed by the BBC when it comes to Gaza or anywhere else, frankly. They've been around since 1963. And they're not just one body either. They're an umbrella group of humanitarian aid agencies, all of which are themselves charities, 15 of them. And the DEC is itself a registered charity as well. They've raised money for humanitarian disasters around the world from the very first time they did it in 1966 for Turkey following an earthquake there. They've done it for nations in the Indian Ocean following the Boxing Day tsunami of 2004, to the Haiti earthquake disaster, but also aid in war zones to help those innocents affected there as well. For example, Ukraine. And since its inception, the DEC has raised £2.2 billion in humanitarian aid across 77 separate appeals. But Gaza, that's been a problem for the BBC before, and it's a problem for them again now. Why are the people of Gaza worth less than people everywhere else, BBC? Why will you broadcast appeals for humanitarian aid, be it via the DEC or not, when it comes to other disasters, other global crises, but not when it comes to the people of Palestine? It's inexcusable. It's evil, frankly, to deny these people aid when they obviously need it. It completely buys into the Israeli apartheid notion that these people are, for some reason, are somehow worth less. That's the message you sent in 2009 when Tony Benn argued against it. And it's the message the BBC is sending again now as the only broadcaster holding this up. Then and now, Gaza on both occasions, they are the only DEC appeals the BBC have ever refused to screen. But here's the real rub to this though. The BBC has screened DEC appeals for Gaza since 2009. They refused in 2009, they refused then, but in 2014, they were more than happy to lend their support to a DEC-instigated Gaza appeal. They didn't worry about Israel then. They weren't quibbling and making excuses about Hamas then. The BBC, according to the DEC, helped them raise more than £16 million over 2 years following that particular appeal. And again, the situation in 2014 was far smaller than what we're observing now over the last 11 months. But increased hostilities between Israel and Hamas saw 1 in every 4 people in Gaza displaced in 2014, more than 2,000 Palestinians killed, and more than 11,000 injured. The BBC was happy to help then. The death toll is 20 times higher now than in 2014 at this moment, and it's still, of course, rising. And that is only taking into account the official figures and not the estimated ones as described by, for example, leading medical journal The Lancet in the last few months in one of their reports, their estimate being many times higher. So not only has the BBC been depraved enough to block a Gaza aid appeal by the DEC previously, they've hypocritically agreed to broadcast one since then, and now they've gone back into their box again and refused. So it all smacks of someone somewhere leaning on the BBC. And if Israel didn't put them off in 2014, has the Israel lobby therefore grown in influence over the last 10 years to the point they make the difference now? Alternatively, both in 2009 and now, Labour were in power, so is that the issue? Goodness knows we know Keir Starmer is completely sold out to them, Zionist without qualification as he is, his leadership campaign funded by the Israel lobby and those associated with it as it was. But was that an issue for Labour in 2009 too? Well, Gordon Brown was the then PM, wasn't he? He certainly did have ties to the Israel lobby. He did, for example, shortly after becoming Prime Minister, become an honorary patron of the Jewish National Fund, which raises money to finance illegal settlements, so maybe there is no smoke without fire there either. We know BBC staff objected to the blocking of that appeal in 2009. We know they are objecting this time as well. So it's a management thing. It's an executive decision. It's coming from on high. But the lack of consistency when it comes to Gaza demands answers to questions people will naturally have about that. What gives? We fund you, BBC, so why won't you broadcast this? It's an aid appeal for innocent victims of genocide. You've done it before. Why not now? Here's an excerpt from The Guardian laying out the criteria the DEC have used here, which frankly demands more answers from the BBC. The launch of a major humanitarian appeal for Gaza by the Disasters Emergency Committee, DEC, is being delayed by the BBC, it has emerged. The corporation said the appeal did not meet all the established criteria for a national appeal, but the possibility of broadcasting an appeal was under review. Other channels have agreed to broadcast an appeal. Insiders at the DEC, the BBC and aid agencies said they were dismayed at the delay. Some have accused the BBC of blocking the appeal because the corporation fears a backlash from supporters of Israel in its war with Hamas. One senior NGO figure said the staff were furious at the BBC's position. The DEC has 3 criteria for launching an appeal itself. The scale and urgency of the disaster must merit swift international humanitarian assistance. Agencies must be able to provide effective and swift humanitarian assistance at a scale to justify a national appeal, and there must be evidence of existing public sympathy for the humanitarian situation, or the likelihood of significant public support should an appeal be launched. It is understood that the second criterion regarding delivery of aid is the focus of discussions. So despite all the criteria, the vetting process, everything like that which the BBC could take on board, it's not good enough now, like it wasn't good enough in 2009, but was good enough in 2014. Make it make sense, Damo. Well, for that, I defer to someone with much greater knowledge on such matters, both of the Middle East and the BBC itself as well, actually. This is what esteemed proper journalist Jonathan Cook has had to say on the matter. The BBC is once again blocking an appeal by 15 aid agencies known as the Disaster Emergencies Committee, DEC, as it did several years ago. And once again it's because the aid is intended for Gaza. The pretext given by BBC execs is that they're concerned the aid can't be delivered to Gaza, though they don't explain why. Because Israel is blocking aid as part of its genocide against the people there. Sources inside the DEC say the BBC is fearful of the backlash from an Israel lobby the BBC and others in the establishment keep telling us exists only in our imaginations. Either the BBC is capitulating to the lobby, or there is no lobby and the corporation is simply run by the ghoulish dregs of humanity. Either way, the BBC is not fit for purpose. I think he's hit the nail on the head completely. The BBC need to explain why they have reached this decision, and not merely say this is what we've decided. We're not going to tell you why, though. It is functionally either the Israel lobby is leaning on them. I would argue there's an aspect of being lent on by the Starmer government too. I wouldn't rule that out, given the pro-Israel leanings there. But equally, if neither of these things are truly a factor, we do deserve to know, it just means the BBC is run by truly god-awful people who see the people of Palestine as less worthy than anyone else. As has been said here both by myself and Jonathan Cook as well, it is only Gaza that has ever been denied a DEC appeal by the BBC. We are entitled as BBC funders to know why. BBC coverage on the genocide happening in Gaza has been deplorable. Many people have sought alternative news sources with regards to keeping informed on what is happening out there. Turn to foreign media, turn to alternative media and social media. But one of the most well-placed sources to comment on the situation and the poor quality of what passes for mainstream British journalism on the subject is certainly independent journalists too, and Jonathan Cook is head and shoulders above most of them in my view. And this isn't the first time he's actually laid into the BBC for their horrendously bad coverage, as this video recommendation illustrates if you're so inclined to watch it next. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers folks.